Much of the news that we read and the other things that we have in our reports are about connection. Ultimately, they promise an ability to join with other people in conversation, to feel part and connected to things. Our newspapers have so many pages given over to gossip and given over to sport because these are subjects of conversation by which we can connect to people who would otherwise be strangers and find some sense of commonality. Likewise, the great news affairs of the day are means of forming a conception of a greater society of which we are part. And social media, by having this great spectacle of shared news, shared events, viral discourses, by discussing the great affairs of our day, whether those are political, whether those are the gossip events that we'd see in the gossip mags, or whether they are the sporting events that people will be watching around the world on their screens, social media promises a way of being part of a community. And yet that community can often lack in the features that we would expect or hope for in a real world community. These are not communities that will provide us with the thickness of presence that we'll find in a church, for instance, or in a family. They will not be contexts where we are forced to live with other people in ways that will challenge and help us to grow. Often they are communities that play to some of our consumer desires, our desire for a community where we feel close and connected to each other without the cost of connection and really being close to each other. The cost, for instance, of being vulnerable to each other, of being known to each other over a long period of time in ways that might lead to the building of a good or a bad reputation. Social media can absolve us or relieve us of much of that burden, putting us in a situation where we do not have to do the business and the hard work of actual community. The community of social media is also one that is found chiefly in images and words. If you think of an actual real-life community, so much of its existence takes place in action. Yet there are many things about a real-life community that will be invisible online. Poverty, for instance, disability, age, authority. Many of these things simply do not register on the internet and in its virtual communities in ways that they would register in real life. In social media, we tend to be abstracted and also detached into discrete individuals with our own properties and interests, with the different ways that we describe ourselves, and each person stands alone. You cannot really translate or transpose a church community into a virtual context. The communities online, we talk about community, we use the language of community, yet they are not communities as we might think of them in that thicker sense, in the ways that we might relate to each other as we worship together and grow up together, as we have contexts where we are subject to each other in love, as we have contexts where we're exhorted and challenged by people who come to know us, people who can see us for who we are, who can see by our actions of what stuff we are made. That challenge to have real-life community, that cost of having real-life community, is one that can often be avoided by retreat into communities of agreement, communities where we are confirmed in our tendencies and our desires online, communities where everyone shares the same interest, communities where everyone is of the same sort of personality type, communities where we are all of the same sort of background, where we don't have to deal with the friction of other people who differ from us. Now, we have plenty of experiences of that friction online, but that friction does not seem to be constructive for the most part. We have experiences of difference and conflict and antagonism, but that is not as part of a unified community. Increasingly, it's something that fractures us into many different communities at odds with each other, into a sort of online tribalism, which can be something that pushes us away from the fruitfulness of very diverse and variegated conversations where many different types of people, men and women, people who are older, people who are younger, people who are poor, people who are well off, people who have authority and people who are under authority, are all interacting together in appropriate contexts and in appropriate ways. The church is a model community. And yet this model community can often be one that is challenged by its virtualization, by retreating to contexts where it is increasingly easy to interact without truly being seen, without truly being accountable and submissive to each other, without truly being known and recognized by others, without truly being in a context where we might have to serve each other and minister to each other. The internet then, for all of its benefits, is more like scaffolding than an actual home or house that we can inhabit. I find the internet very helpful for forming networks between people, with the promise that you might actually connect in person. And yet, if you are living in the scaffolding, you will not find that you are having a very healthy form of life. The form of life that we're looking for is one that propels us into deeper and more substantial interaction in real life, with people who can call us to account, with people who can see us for who we really are, with people who are not just preoccupied with the spectacle, with a persona, with how we appear to each other online, but with who we really are, how we grow over time, how we relate across our differences, how we develop many different contexts which are integrated together, not just collapsed into one, but joined together in a choreography of community. Community is costly and difficult, particularly if we're going to do it in a way that will really form us in a healthy manner. Yet community is where we find the promise of God's presence. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I'm there in the midst of them. That promise is one that we take hold of as we join together in community in the church. And that community is one that needs to be ordered according to the models that Christ has given us, according to the models that we see within the Scripture, not merely according to the patterns that are offered to us by modern technology and the society that has been formed by it. Our community should serve as a sort of touchstone for what is real and unreal online about community. It should give us a sense of what is really real and what is merely ephemeral, those things that really matter and those things which actually don't in fact really matter.